For decades, scientists laughed whenever the name Bigfoot was mentioned. Universities dismissed it, wildlife experts avoided it, and most people assumed it belonged in the same category as campfire stories and old legends. But something strange has been happening in recent years. Quietly, without press conferences or headlines, researchers have started looking at the evidence again, and what they are finding is far more unsettling than anyone expected. Across North America, thousands of witnesses describe the same towering figure moving silently through the forests. Massive footprints appear miles away from the nearest road. Unidentified vocalizations echo through mountains at night. And now, new technology from DNA analysis to thermal imaging is revealing clues that scientists once believed were impossible. Some researchers are beginning to admit something they never thought. They would say out loud, what if Bigfoot was never just a myth? What if, hidden within the vast wilderness of North America, there exists a species that has watched humanity for centuries without ever truly being discovered? Tonight, we are going to explore the evidence that has made even skeptical scientists reconsider the impossible, and the discoveries that suggest the truth about Bigfoot may be far bigger than anyone imagined. Because if even a small part of this mystery is real, then something extraordinary may still be living in the forests, watching from the shadows, waiting to be understood. For more than a century, the idea of Bigfoot had lived somewhere between folklore and ridicule. Scientists avoided the topic, journalists mocked it, and universities treated it like a cultural curiosity rather than a biological mystery. Yet deep in the forests of North America, something continued to leave massive footprints, break trees with unnatural force, and appear in the memories of thousands of witnesses who never met each other. What changed everything was not a single sighting, but a pattern that slowly became impossible to ignore. Quietly, in laboratories and field stations, a few researchers began to ask a forbidden question. What if the stories were not exaggerations, but fragments of a real biological puzzle waiting to be understood? The turning point did not happen on television or in a sensational headline. It began in small scientific circles where wildlife biologists were already accustomed to studying elusive animals. Creatures like mountain lions, wolverines, and even giant squids had once been dismissed as myths until evidence forced the scientific community to reconsider. Some researchers began noticing that the Bigfoot phenomenon followed similar patterns. Reports consistently came from remote forests, mountainous terrain, and areas with very low human presence. These were exactly the kinds of environments where undiscovered species could theoretically survive for centuries. One of the first pieces of evidence that made scientists pause was the consistency of eyewitness descriptions. Across decades and across different regions, people described the same towering figure. Witnesses spoke of a massive bipedal creature covered in dark or brown fur, often between 7 and 10 feet tall. The arms were unusually long, the shoulders extremely broad, and the movement strangely fluid for something so large. These descriptions came from hunters, forestry workers, park rangers, and even police officers. Many of them had spent their entire lives in the wilderness and knew the difference between imagination and reality. Another detail that caught researchers' attention was the behavior described by witnesses. The creature was rarely aggressive, but appeared highly aware of humans. In many encounters, Bigfoot seemed to observe from a distance before silently disappearing into the forest. This level of caution suggested intelligence and environmental awareness. Some witnesses even described the creature circling campsites at night without ever revealing itself directly. Such behavior would require a sophisticated understanding of human movement and territory. Then came the footprints. Hundreds of casts had been collected over the years, but many scientists initially dismissed them as hoaxes. However, a few experts in primate locomotion began analyzing the prints more carefully. What they found was unusual. Some footprints displayed anatomical features that would be extremely difficult to fake convincingly. These included flexible midfoot structures, pressure patterns consistent with massive body weight, and dermal ridges similar to fingerprints. If these casts were fake, they were made with a level of anatomical knowledge that few hoaxers would possess. Another mystery emerged when scientists compared footprint measurements from different decades. Instead of random variations, the prints showed consistent proportions over time. The width of the heel, the angle of the toes, and the length of the stride all followed patterns that suggested a real biological species rather than fabricated evidence. Even more surprising was the stride length. Some tracks indicated that the creature could walk with steps exceeding 6 feet. That level of stride efficiency hinted at an organism built specifically for long-distance forest travel. But the footprints were only the beginning. Researchers started to examine environmental signs linked to reported sightings. Entire tree trunks were found twisted or snapped at heights far above human reach. Large wooden structures made from branches appeared deep in remote forests, often arranged in strange formations. While skeptics argued these could be natural phenomena, some field biologists noted that the patterns resembled territorial markers seen in other intelligent mammals. The most intriguing evidence came from sound. Recordings collected in remote wilderness areas. Strange vocalizations echoed through forests at night, far deeper and more complex than known animal calls. Audio experts analyzed the recordings and discovered frequency ranges that would require an enormous lung capacity to produce. Some calls even seemed to contain rhythmic patterns, almost like communication signals rather than random animal noises. DNA research added another layer of complexity. Hair samples collected from alleged Bigfoot habitats often produced unusual results in genetic testing. Some samples matched known animals like bears or deer, but others returned partial sequences that did not fully correspond to any known species. While these results were inconclusive, they suggested that something unusual might be present in those environments. One of the biggest challenges scientists faced was the creature's apparent ability to remain hidden. North America contains vast wilderness regions where human access is extremely limited. Dense forests, rugged mountains, and deep river valleys create natural refuges where wildlife can remain unseen for generations. Biologists studying elusive predators like the wolverine often go years without direct sightings. If Bigfoot were equally intelligent and cautious, avoiding humans might not be as impossible as skeptics believed. As these fragments of evidence accumulated, a small group of researchers began to speak more openly. They were not claiming that Bigfoot had already been proven beyond doubt. Instead, they argued that the phenomenon deserved serious scientific investigation rather than automatic dismissal. Their reasoning was simple. When thousands of independent reports align with physical evidence, ignoring the mystery becomes scientifically irresponsible. The real question, however, was far more unsettling than whether Bigfoot existed. If a large, intelligent primate had lived undetected in North America for centuries, it would force scientists to rethink what they believed about human history, wildlife, evolution, and the hidden corners of our planet. And that possibility alone was enough to make some researchers quietly admit something that would have sounded impossible only a few decades ago. Bigfoot might be far more real than we ever imagined. Asterisk for decades. The scientific community avoided the Bigfoot question for one simple reason: reputation. Any researcher who openly studied the subject risked becoming the target of ridicule. Careers in academia depend heavily on credibility, funding, and peer acceptance. Associating with a topic labeled as fringe could destroy years of work overnight. Yet beneath the surface of scientific institutions, a quiet shift was beginning. More researchers were privately reviewing the data, and what they discovered was far more complex than the public had been told. One of the first things scientists noticed was the sheer volume of reports. Thousands of sightings had been documented across North America over the last 2 centuries. These were not vague rumors whispered around campfires. Many were detailed accounts recorded by law enforcement officers, forestry workers, hunters, and experienced outdoorsmen. These individuals were familiar with wildlife and trained to recognize the animals that inhabit the forests. When such witnesses reported encountering something unknown, their testimonies carried weight. Researchers began mapping the locations of these sightings, expecting randomness. Instead, a pattern emerged. Most encounters occurred near large wilderness corridors stretching from the Pacific Northwest down through Northern California, across the Rocky Mountains, and into the forests of the Appalachian region. These areas share similar ecological characteristics. They contain dense forest cover, abundant water sources, and large populations of prey animals such as deer and elk. In other words, they are perfect habitats for large omnivorous mammals. Another compelling detail was the timing of encounters. Many sightings occurred at dawn, dusk, or during the night. This pattern is consistent with the behavior of many intelligent mammals that avoid human activity. Animals that have learned to coexist near humans often adapt their schedules to remain unseen. Wolves, cougars, and even bears exhibit similar patterns. If Bigfoot were real, it would make perfect sense for the creature to move primarily when humans are least active. The physical evidence also continued to accumulate. Footprints were discovered in remote areas immediately after storms, in fresh snow and deep mud. Some tracks appeared miles from the nearest road, making it extremely unlikely that a prankster had walked deep into the wilderness simply to create a hoax. In several cases, researchers followed trackways that stretched for hundreds of yards, showing a consistent stride and direction. The footprints moved with purpose, as if the animal knew exactly where it was going. What fascinated scientists most was the biomechanics of these tracks. The prints often displayed a flexible midfoot structure that is rare among primates. Humans have rigid arches, but the Bigfoot tracks seemed to indicate a foot capable of bending in the middle. This would allow the creature to move silently across uneven forest terrain. Such an adaptation would be extremely useful for navigating dense forests while avoiding detection. Asterisk. One of the most intriguing aspects of the film was the creature's movement. When biomechanical experts studied the footage frame by frame, they noticed something unusual about the way the figure walked. The gait did not resemble the motion of a human wearing a bulky costume. The arms swung naturally with each step, and the body weight appeared to shift smoothly across the hips and shoulders. The movement looked balanced and efficient rather than exaggerated or awkward. Another feature that drew attention was the creature's proportions. The figure appeared to have unusually long arms that extended well below the waist. The shoulders were extremely broad, and the legs seemed proportionally shorter than those of a typical human. These proportions closely matched the descriptions given by eyewitnesses over decades of sightings. If the figure were a costume, it would have required significant anatomical alteration to replicate such proportions. Perhaps the most controversial detail was the muscle movement visible beneath the fur. When researchers enhanced certain frames of the film, they noticed subtle shifts along the creature's back and thighs as it walked. These movements suggested underlying musculature rather than loose fabric. Some analysts argued that the footage showed the contraction of large muscle groups supporting the creature's enormous body weight. The face of the creature also sparked intense debate. Unlike a mask with fixed features, the film appeared to show slight changes in expression as the figure turned its head toward the camera. The brow ridge looked heavy and prominent, and the nose seemed flatter than that of a human. The eyes appeared deeply set within the skull, giving the creature a strangely intelligent yet wary expression. Hollywood costume designers were eventually asked to evaluate the film. Many experts in special effects concluded that recreating such a convincing costume with the technology available in the 1960s would have been extremely difficult. Materials capable of simulating muscle movement and realistic fur patterns simply did not exist at that time. Some designers admitted that even modern studios might struggle to produce such natural-looking motion in a practical suit. Another detail emerged when scientists studied the footprints associated with the filming location. Investigators returned to Bluff Creek shortly after the incident and discovered a series of large tracks matching the creature seen in the film. Several casts were made of these footprints, revealing anatomical details similar to other Bigfoot tracks found across North America. The footprint suggested a massive bipedal animal weighing several hundred pounds. Over the decades, attempts were made to recreate the film using actors in suits. While some recreations looked somewhat similar, they often lacked the subtle movement patterns seen in the original footage. The weight distribution and stride length of the filmed figure remained difficult to duplicate convincingly. Even trained athletes struggled to replicate the exact gait without appearing forced or unnatural, of course. Skeptics continued to argue that the film was simply an elaborate hoax. Some claimed that Patterson had hired a man to wear a costume and stage the encounter, yet no definitive proof of such a hoax was ever produced. The alleged costume was never found, and no credible witness ever admitted to playing the role of the creature. The mystery remained unresolved as years passed. The Patterson-Gimlin film became one of the most analyzed pieces of footage in cryptozoology. It was studied in universities, television documentaries, and independent research projects. Each new generation of analysts approached it with fresh tools, hoping to finally settle the debate. Instead, the film continued to resist easy explanations. For some scientists, the footage represented a tantalizing possibility. It might be the first visual documentation of a species that science had not yet formally recognized. For others, it remained an unsolved puzzle that challenged assumptions about what humans truly know about the natural world. Yet the film was only the beginning of a much larger investigation. As technology advanced, scientists began using entirely new methods to search for evidence in the wilderness. These tools, satellite mapping, environmental DNA analysis, and advanced audio monitoring, would soon reveal clues that no one had been able to detect before. As debates about sightings and film evidence continued, a new field of science quietly began changing the way researchers study wildlife. It was called environmental DNA, often shortened to eDNA. This technique allowed scientists to detect the presence of animals, simply by analyzing tiny genetic traces left behind in the environment. Hair, skin cells, saliva, and even microscopic particles in water could reveal what species had recently passed through an area. Wildlife biologists had already used this method to confirm the presence of extremely rare animals that had never been photographed in the wild. Fish species, amphibians, and even elusive mammals had been detected through genetic traces found in rivers and soil. When some researchers realized that this technique could potentially be applied to the Bigfoot mystery, curiosity grew quickly within a small but determined group of scientists. Samples began to be collected from locations where Bigfoot sightings had been repeatedly reported. Researchers gathered hair strands found caught on tree bark, unusual fibers discovered on broken branches, and water samples from remote streams. Each sample was carefully preserved and sent to laboratories for analysis. The expectation was simple. The DNA would likely match known animals such as bears, deer, or humans. In many cases, that is exactly what happened. Several samples turned out to belong to black bears, elk, or other animals common to the region. But occasionally, the results were far more puzzling. Some genetic sequences returned partial matches that did not clearly belong to any known species in the database. The fragments resembled primate DNA, but contained unusual variations that researchers struggled to classify. One particularly intriguing set of samples came from hair strands discovered in a remote forest area in the Pacific Northwest. Under microscopic examination, the hair lacked the medulla pattern commonly found in bears or other large mammals. Instead, the structure resembled that of primates. When scientists attempted to sequence the DNA, they obtained fragments that appeared partly human, yet clearly different. These results triggered intense debate within the research community. Critics argued that contamination could easily produce confusing genetic signals. Supporters countered that strict laboratory protocols had been followed to prevent such contamination. Some scientists suggested the possibility that the samples could belong to an unknown primate species, or perhaps a distant evolutionary relative. Humans. The controversy deepened when similar genetic anomalies were reported from other locations. Across North America, independent researchers collecting environmental samples sometimes encountered DNA fragments that did not perfectly match known wildlife. While none of the sequences were complete enough to identify a new species definitively, the recurring anomalies kept the mystery alive. Geneticists began considering another possibility. If Bigfoot existed, its DNA might not perfectly match any species currently stored in genetic databases. Modern DNA comparison relies on reference sequences from known organisms. Without a complete reference sample, partial genetic fragments could remain unclassified. In other words, the evidence might already exist without scientists realizing what it truly represents at the same time. Skeptics pointed out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. A few ambiguous DNA fragments were not enough to confirm the existence of a giant primate roaming North America. However, even critics admitted that the unexplained sequences deserved further investigation. Rather than immediate dismissal, the emergence of environmental DNA technology also revealed something surprising about the wilderness itself. Rivers, soil, and plant surfaces act like natural recorders of biological activity. Every animal that drinks from a stream or brushes against vegetation leaves microscopic traces behind. Over time, these traces accumulate, creating a hidden archive of life moving through the forest. Researchers studying Bigfoot reports realized that if the creature truly existed, it would almost certainly leave genetic evidence somewhere in these environmental records. The challenge was finding samples that were fresh enough and complete enough to analyze properly. Remote wilderness areas with minimal human interference became prime targets for future investigations. Some scientists began organizing long-term field studies focused on collecting environmental DNA from regions with repeated Bigfoot sightings. These projects combined traditional wildlife tracking with advanced genetic analysis. Motion sensors, audio recorders, and DNA sampling kits were deployed deep in the forest, sometimes remaining in place for months at a time. What made the situation even more intriguing was the possibility that Bigfoot might not be a completely unknown species. Some researchers speculated that it could represent a surviving population of an ancient hominid related to early human ancestors. Fossil records show that multiple human-like species once inhabited different parts of the world. Could one of these lineages have survived in isolation within North America's vast wilderness? If that were true, the implications would be extraordinary. It would mean that a hidden branch of the human evolutionary tree had lived alongside modern civilization without being formally recognized. Such a discovery would rewrite textbooks about human history and the migration of ancient species. But the DNA mystery was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. While laboratories searched for genetic clues, another group of scientists focused on something far more immediate: the strange sounds that echoed through remote forests at night. And what those recordings revealed would leave even experienced researchers unsettled. While geneticists searched for microscopic clues, another group of researchers turned their attention to something far more audible. For decades, campers, hunters, and park rangers had reported hearing strange sounds deep in the forest at night. These sounds were often described as howls, screams, or deep calls that seemed unlike any known animal. At first, such reports were dismissed as misidentified wolf calls or the eerie cries of foxes. But as recording technology improved, some scientists began capturing these sounds with sensitive audio equipment. The first serious recordings came from wilderness monitoring stations that had been installed to track wildlife activity. These devices were designed to record environmental sounds continuously for weeks or months. In several remote regions, the recordings captured deep vocalizations that startled even experienced biologists. The calls were extremely loud, carrying across valleys for miles, and possessed tonal structures rarely heard in known North American wildlife. Bioacoustic specialists began analyzing the recordings using spectral analysis software. This technology allows researchers to break down sounds into frequency patterns, revealing details invisible to the human ear. What they discovered was fascinating. Some of the mysterious calls contained layered frequencies that suggested complex vocal cords capable of producing multiple tones at once. This trait is often associated with highly intelligent mammals, including primates. Even more unusual were the rhythmic patterns embedded within some recordings. Certain calls appeared to be answered by similar sounds coming from distant locations in the forest. The timing between these responses suggested intentional communication rather than random noise. In several cases, researchers mapped the distance between the responding sounds and estimated that the calls were traveling across several miles of wilderness. Hunters who had spent years in remote forests were not surprised by these findings. Many had heard similar calls long before recording equipment existed. Some described the sounds as deep, almost human-like screams that echoed through the night. Others reported hearing sequences of knocking sounds, loud strikes against wood that seemed to travel from one ridge to another. These wood knocks became one of the most mysterious behaviors associated with the Bigfoot phenomenon. Scientists studying primates found the knocking sounds particularly interesting. In several species of great apes, percussive sounds are used as a form of communication. Gorillas and chimpanzees sometimes strike tree trunks or the ground to signal dominance or warn others of danger. If a large primate lived in North American forests, wood knocking could serve a similar purpose, allowing individuals to communicate across long distances without revealing their exact location. Researchers also noticed that many of the strange vocalizations occurred in areas where Bigfoot sightings had previously been reported. When maps of recorded sounds were compared with sighting databases, several regions showed remarkable overlap. This pattern suggested that whatever was producing the sounds might be connected to the creature. Witnesses claimed to see one particularly famous set of recordings became known as the Sierra sounds, captured in the mountains of California during the 1970s. These recordings featured a series of powerful vocalizations, unlike any documented wildlife calls. Linguistic experts who later analyzed the sounds noted that some patterns resembled structured speech rhythms rather than simple animal noises. While this did not prove the presence of language, it raised fascinating questions about the intelligence of the source. Skeptics argued that humans could easily fake such sounds, especially in remote wilderness areas. Yet several recordings were captured in locations where no human activity had been reported for miles. In some cases, the sounds were recorded simultaneously by multiple monitoring devices placed across large distances. This made it unlikely that a single hoaxer could have produced the calls. Another mystery emerged when researchers measured the volume of certain recordings. Some of the calls were so powerful that they would require enormous lung capacity to produce naturally. The sound pressure levels suggested a very large animal capable of projecting its voice across vast distances. Few known North American mammals possess the vocal anatomy necessary to generate such deep, resonant calls. Field researchers began experimenting with their own audio equipment to provoke responses. In certain areas, they played recordings of wood knocks or deep calls through speakers hidden in the forest. Occasionally, similar sounds were returned from distant locations, as if something in the wilderness had heard and responded to the signals. These exchanges were rare but intriguing enough to encourage further experiments. Over time, the collection of mysterious audio recordings grew larger. Some scientists remained skeptical, insisting that unknown sounds alone could not confirm the existence of a new species. Others believed the recordings represented one of the strongest clues yet that something unusual inhabited these forests. What made the situation even more compelling was the fact that many of these sounds occurred in the same wilderness regions where strange physical signs had been discovered. Broken trees, large footprints, and unexplained structures appeared alongside the mysterious vocalization. As researchers began connecting these pieces together, a new possibility started forming in their minds. The creature described in Bigfoot sightings might not only be real, it might also be far more intelligent and socially complex than anyone had ever imagined. As researchers spent more time exploring regions associated with Bigfoot sightings, they began noticing something unusual in the forests themselves. In remote locations far from trails or campsites, strange formations made of branches and tree trunks appeared scattered across the landscape. At first glance, they looked like the result of fallen trees or storm damage. But closer inspection revealed patterns that did not always match natural processes. Many of these formations were large structures made from heavy branches leaning against one another in deliberate shapes. Some resembled teepees made of wood, while others formed arches or massive X-shaped arrangements between trees. The branches were often wedged tightly together, creating stable formations that appeared intentionally built. In several cases, the branches were snapped rather than cut, suggesting they had been broken by immense physical force. Wildlife researchers initially assumed these formations might be related to normal animal activity. Beavers, for example, build dams and lodges using branches and mud. But these forest structures were located far from water sources where beavers typically work. In addition, the size of the branches involved was often enormous. Some weighed hundreds of pounds and were placed at heights well above what most animals could manage. Another detail puzzled investigators even more. Certain formations appeared in areas where Bigfoot sightings had recently been reported. Witnesses who returned to the same locations sometimes discovered new structures that had not been present before. This raised the possibility that the formations were being created over time, rather than resulting from a single natural event like a storm. Researchers began documenting these structures carefully, photographing and mapping their locations. Patterns started to emerge. Many of the formations were positioned along natural travel corridors through the forest. Some were located near water sources, while others appeared along ridgelines overlooking valleys. These placements suggested that the structures might serve a purpose beyond random arrangement. One theory proposed by investigators was that the formations could function as territorial markers. In many animal species, physical signs are used to signal ownership of an area. Wolves mark territory with scent, while bears leave claw marks on trees. If Bigfoot were a highly intelligent creature, building visible structures could be a way to communicate presence to others of its kind. Another possibility was that the formations served as navigation markers. Deep forests can be confusing even for experienced outdoorsmen. Carefully placed structures could act as visual guides, helping individuals navigate large territories without getting lost. Some formations were located near natural pathways between valleys, which might support this theory. A few researchers speculated that the structures might also function as shelters or resting points. While they were not enclosed like human shelters, certain formations created partial cover from wind or rain. In regions where winters are harsh and temperatures drop drastically, even minimal protection could provide an advantage for survival. Perhaps the most surprising discovery came when investigators found twisted tree trunks that appeared to have been deliberately manipulated. Some trees had been bent into unusual shapes while still alive, forcing them to grow in unnatural directions. These tree twists were often discovered near other formations, suggesting a pattern of intentional environmental modification. Skeptics continued to argue that natural forces could explain these structures. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, or falling trees might create unusual arrangements by chance. However, researchers studying the formations pointed out that many structures appeared too symmetrical or deliberately balanced to be purely accidental. In some cases, branches had been carefully interlocked in ways that resisted collapse. Local hunters and forestry workers added their own observations. Several reported encountering these formations deep in the woods long before scientists began documenting them. Some claimed they had watched fresh branches appear overnight in areas where nothing had previously existed. Others described hearing loud cracking sounds in the forest as if large branches were being snapped nearby. One particular detail caught the attention of scientists studying primate behavior. In some great ape species, simple structures are built for sleeping or resting. Gorillas and chimpanzees construct nests using branches and leaves, sometimes leaving behind clear signs of their activity. While the forest structures attributed to Bigfoot were much larger and more complex. The concept of environmental construction was not unheard of in the primate world. Over time, the growing catalogue of mysterious formations became one more piece of the puzzle. While none of the structures proved definitively that Bigfoot existed, they raised questions about whether an unknown, large animal might be altering its environment in subtle ways. But the deeper researchers looked into these wilderness regions, the more unsettling another discovery became. Some of the most credible witnesses describing encounters with Bigfoot were not tourists or hikers. They were professionals who spent their entire careers in the forest, and many of them had stories they had kept quiet for years. Asterisk among the thousands of reported encounters with Bigfoot, some of the most compelling testimonies came from people who were rarely willing to speak publicly. These were park rangers, wildlife officers, and forestry workers, individuals whose entire careers were built around understanding the wilderness. They spent more time in remote forests than almost anyone else. If something unusual was living out there, these professionals would be among the first to notice. Yet for decades, many of these witnesses remained silent. The reason was simple. Government employees working in national parks and forests often feared that discussing mysterious creatures could damage their professional credibility. Rangers are expected to rely on science and documented wildlife knowledge. Admitting to seeing something unknown could invite ridicule or even threaten their careers. Despite this silence, stories occasionally surfaced in private conversations. Some rangers admitted that they had experienced strange encounters during night patrols or remote backcountry assignments. A few described seeing large figures moving between trees at distances where no known animal should have been able to move. Upright, one ranger who had worked in the forests of Washington State reportedly told researchers about an incident that occurred during a routine patrol. While driving along a remote logging road at dusk, he noticed something standing near the edge of the forest. At first he assumed it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but as his vehicle approached, the figure stepped across the road with long, deliberate strides and disappeared into the trees. What unsettled the ranger most was the creature's posture. Bears occasionally stand upright for brief moments, but they do not walk smoothly on two legs for long distances. This figure moved with balance and confidence, covering ground far more efficiently than any bear he had ever observed. Another ranger from the Appalachian region shared a different experience. During a nighttime search for a lost hiker, his team heard heavy footsteps moving parallel to them through the forest. The steps were loud enough to snap branches and disturb leaves. Yet whatever was making the noise remained just beyond the reach of their flashlights. According to the ranger, the footsteps followed the search team for nearly half an hour. Every time they stopped moving, the sounds stopped as well. When they began walking again, the footsteps resumed at a distance. The behavior suggested something intelligent that was deliberately observing the group, without revealing itself. There were also reports of strange disturbances at remote campsites. Some rangers described arriving at backcountry areas to find food containers scattered, tents overturned, or large rocks placed near fire pits. While bears could cause similar damage, certain details did not match typical bear behavior. In some cases, large footprints were discovered nearby. Perhaps the most unusual accounts involved vocalizations heard deep in the forest. Rangers occasionally reported hearing powerful screams or howls echoing through valleys late at night. These sounds were far louder than coyotes or wolves and carried an eerie, almost human-like tone. Some rangers admitted that the calls made them feel uneasy. Even after years of working in wilderness environments, a few individuals eventually shared their experiences anonymously with researchers studying the Bigfoot phenomenon. These testimonies were often detailed and consistent with other witness accounts from civilians. The descriptions of the creature's height, movement, and behavior matched patterns seen in sightings across multiple regions. What made these reports especially significant was the background of the witnesses. Park rangers are trained to identify wildlife and environmental patterns. They spend years learning the habits of animals such as bears, cougars, and wolves. When such professionals describe encountering something they cannot identify, their observations become difficult to dismiss. Of course, not every ranger believed in the existence of Bigfoot. Many remained skeptical and attributed sightings to misidentified animals or human imagination. Yet even among skeptics, there was acknowledgement that strange events occasionally occurred in remote areas that did not have easy explanations. Some rangers also pointed out an important reality about wilderness areas. National parks and forests cover enormous territories, many of which remain largely unexplored by humans. Even today, there are valleys, mountains, and dense forests where very few people have ever set foot. These regions provide ideal habitats for wildlife to remain hidden. As researchers gathered more testimonies from professionals working in these environments, the mystery surrounding Bigfoot began to feel less like a simple myth and more like an unanswered scientific question. The forests held secrets that few people truly understood. But perhaps the most fascinating clue did not come from modern witnesses at all. It came from stories that had been told for centuries long before cameras, DNA testing, or modern science ever existed. Indigenous cultures across North America had spoken about a mysterious forest being for generations, and their descriptions contained details that modern researchers were only beginning to recognize. Long before scientists began analyzing footprints, DNA samples, and audio recordings, the indigenous peoples of North America had already been telling stories about a mysterious forest being. These traditions were passed down through generations, often shared around fires or woven into cultural teachings about the land. While different tribes used different names, the descriptions of the creature were remarkably similar across vast distances in the Pacific Northwest. Many tribes spoke of a being known as Sasquatch, a word believed to originate from the Holcomb language. According to these traditions, Sasquatch was a large, human-like figure covered in hair who lived deep within the forests and mountains. The stories often described the creature as powerful but intelligent, capable of observing humans without being easily seen. Among the Salish peoples, Sasquatch was not always portrayed as a monster. In some accounts, it was viewed as a guardian of the wilderness, being connected to the natural world. Elders told stories of encounters where hunters heard strange calls echoing through valleys or discovered large footprints along riverbanks. These tales were not always meant to frighten people. Sometimes they served as reminders to respect the forest. Further south, tribes in California and Oregon shared similar legends. Some described encounters with tall, hairy beings who moved quietly through the woods and avoided human contact whenever possible. These stories often emphasized the creature's intelligence and awareness. Witnesses in these traditions sometimes described the being watching from the shadows before disappearing silently into the trees in the Appalachian region. Other indigenous groups told stories about large wild men living in the mountains. These beings were often described as reclusive and powerful, sometimes capable of throwing rocks or making loud calls that echoed through the valleys. The details of these stories bear an uncanny resemblance to modern reports of Bigfoot behavior. Anthropologists studying these traditions noticed something fascinating. Many of the descriptions recorded centuries ago closely matched modern eyewitness reports. The height, the long arms, the hair-covered body, and the creature's tendency to remain hidden were all recurring themes. This raised an intriguing question. Could these stories represent ancient encounters with a real species? Skeptics argue that folklore often exaggerates real animals into mythical creatures. Bears standing upright, for example, could be misinterpreted as human-like beings in poor lighting conditions. Yet the consistency of the descriptions across different tribes made some researchers pause. These cultures were separated by large geographic distances and had no communication with one another. Yet their accounts shared striking similarities. Some indigenous elders have spoken about the creature in ways that go beyond simple folklore. In certain communities, Sasquatch is treated as a real presence within the forest rather than a mythological figure. Elders sometimes warn younger generations not to venture into certain areas at night, suggesting that the creature prefers to remain undisturbed. Researchers who spent time listening to these oral traditions began to see them in a new light. Instead of dismissing the stories as legends, they started viewing them as historical observations. Before written records existed, oral storytelling was the primary way people documented unusual events in the natural world. Another interesting detail found in these traditions was the creature's behavior. In many stories, Sasquatch was described as avoiding humans rather than attacking them. This pattern matches most modern sightings, where witnesses report the creature fleeing once it realizes it has been seen. Such cautious behavior could help explain how a large animal might remain hidden for centuries. Some anthropologists believe that ancient stories can preserve surprisingly accurate information about wildlife. Indigenous knowledge has often helped scientists locate rare species or understand environmental changes, long before modern research confirmed them. In that context, the legends of Sasquatch might represent cultural memories of a creature that occasionally crossed paths with humans. Even more intriguing were certain details that appeared in multiple traditions. Some tribes described the creature communicating with deep calls or knocking sounds in the forest. Others spoke about massive footprints discovered along riverbanks or muddy trails. These details match the same types of evidence that modern investigators continue to document today. As scientists began comparing indigenous accounts with modern reports, a fascinating possibility emerged. The Bigfoot phenomenon might not be a modern myth at all. Instead, it could represent a mystery that humans have been encountering for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. If that were true, the question was no longer whether the creature had been seen before. The real question was far more unsettling. Why had modern science taken so long to take these ancient observations seriously? And what might happen if the scientific community finally decided to investigate the mystery with full attention? As the evidence continued to accumulate footprints, strange vocalizations, environmental structures, and centuries of eyewitness reports, some scientists began exploring a possibility that once seemed unthinkable. What if Bigfoot was not a supernatural creature or a misunderstood bear, but a biological species that had simply never been formally documented? Specifically, a large primate adapted to North American wilderness. At first, the idea sounded extreme. North America is not known for having native primates. The continent's wildlife includes bears, wolves, cougars, moose, and many other mammals. But no large ape species has ever been officially recorded living there. However, paleontologists reminded researchers that the fossil record often tells a different story from what we see today. Millions of years ago, various primate species lived across many parts of the world, including regions far outside modern tropical zones. Fossils of ancient primates have been discovered in Europe, Asia, and North America dating back tens of millions of years. Over time, climate changes and shifting ecosystems caused many of these species to disappear or migrate. One species frequently mentioned in discussions about Bigfoot is This enormous ape lived in Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago and is believed to have stood nearly 10 feet tall when upright. Fossil evidence shows that Gigantopithecus possessed massive jaws and powerful muscles, capable of supporting its large body weight. Although scientists believe it went extinct long ago, its size and characteristics resemble many descriptions of Bigfoot. Some researchers have wondered whether a distant relative of Gigantopithecus could have migrated across ancient land bridges during prehistoric times. During the Ice Age, sea levels were much lower than they are today. This exposed the Bering Land Bridge, connecting Asia and North America. Many animal species crossed this land bridge, including mammoths, bison, and early human populations. If an ancient primate lineage had crossed into North America during this period, it could have adapted to forest environments over thousands of years. Dense wilderness areas would provide protection and resources for survival. Over time, the species might evolve physical traits suited for colder climates, such as thicker fur and larger body mass. Anthropologists also considered another possibility. The creature described in Bigfoot sightings might represent a surviving branch of ancient human relatives. Throughout evolutionary history, multiple human-like species existed simultaneously. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic hominins once shared the planet with early Homo sapiens. Fossil discoveries over the last century have repeatedly surprised scientists. Entire human-like species have been identified from just a few bones or teeth. In some cases, these discoveries revealed that ancient hominins possessed traits far different from what researchers expected. The idea that an unknown hominin could have survived in remote regions was not completely impossible. Of course, skeptics pointed out that such a species should have left clearer fossil evidence by now. Bones, teeth, or skeletons would eventually appear if a population existed in North America. Yet wildlife biologists countered that the fossilization process is extremely rare. Most animals that die in forests decompose quickly or are scattered by scavengers before fossilization can occur. Another factor that complicated the search was population size. If Bigfoot existed, the population might be very small and spread across enormous territories. Large mammals with low population densities can be extremely difficult to locate. For example, snow leopards remained largely unseen by scientists for decades, despite living in mountainous regions known to local communities. Behavior could also play a crucial role. Highly intelligent animals often develop strategies to avoid human detection. Great apes are capable of complex social behavior, communication, and environmental awareness. If a large primate species had evolved in North American forests, it might have developed exceptional stealth and survival strategies. Researchers studying Bigfoot reports noticed that witnesses often described the creature moving silently through thick vegetation. Some accounts even suggested that it seemed aware of cameras or human observation. While such claims are difficult to verify, they hint at a level of intelligence beyond that of typical wildlife. Another detail supporting the primate hypothesis was the creature's upright posture. Unlike bears, which walk on two legs only occasionally, Bigfoot is consistently described as moving comfortably in a bipedal stance. This trait is strongly associated with primates and hominin species rather than other mammals. Gradually, the primate hypothesis moved from being a fringe idea to a topic quietly discussed within certain scientific circles. Most researchers still remained cautious, emphasizing that extraordinary claims require strong evidence. Yet the possibility itself opened a fascinating avenue of investigation. If Bigfoot truly represented an undiscovered primate or hominin, it would become one of the most important zoological discoveries in modern history. Such a finding would reshape our understanding of evolution, migration, and the hidden biodiversity of our planet. But as scientists debated evolutionary theories, new technological tools were beginning to reveal something even more intriguing. Advances in satellite imaging, thermal cameras, and remote sensing were allowing researchers to examine wilderness areas in ways never before possible. And what these technologies occasionally detected in the forests was enough to keep the mystery alive. For most of history, the only way to search for unknown animals was to physically walk through the wilderness. Researchers had to rely on footprints, sightings, or direct encounters. But in recent decades, technology has completely changed how scientists explore remote environments. Satellites, thermal imaging cameras, drones, and long-range sensors now allow researchers to observe vast areas of wilderness without ever stepping into them. Wildlife biologists have already used these technologies to locate animals that were once thought to be nearly impossible to track. Thermal cameras, for example, detect heat signatures emitted by living bodies. Even in total darkness, a warm-blooded animal stands out clearly against cooler surroundings. This technology has helped scientists monitor nocturnal species such as wolves, cougars, and bears. Asterisk. When some researchers began experimenting with thermal imaging in regions known for Bigfoot sightings, the results occasionally raised eyebrows. In several instances, cameras captured large, upright heat signatures moving through dense forest areas late at night. These shapes did not always resemble the typical profile of known wildlife. Some appeared taller and narrower than bears, with proportions closer to a human figure. Of course, interpreting thermal images is not always straightforward. Distance, vegetation, and camera angles can distort shapes, making ordinary animals appear unusual. Skeptics argue that many thermal mysteries can be explained by misidentified deer, bears standing upright, or even humans passing through the forest. Still, a handful of recordings remain difficult to classify with certainty. Another tool gaining attention is satellite-based environmental analysis. Modern satellites can map forests in extraordinary detail, measuring vegetation density, terrain elevation, and even patterns of movement within ecosystems. By combining satellite data with sighting reports, researchers have started identifying corridors where large animals might travel undetected. These corridors often follow natural features such as river valleys, mountain ridges, and dense forest belts that stretch across entire regions. If a large primate species existed, such corridors would allow individuals to migrate between territories without entering populated areas. Some of these wilderness routes span hundreds of miles and remain largely untouched by human development. Drones equipped with infrared cameras have also been deployed in certain research areas. Unlike satellites, drones can fly low above the forest canopy and capture detailed thermal images of the ground below. In several experiments, researchers scanning remote valleys detected heat signatures that disappeared quickly before clear identification could be made. What fascinated scientists most was how quickly some of these shapes seemed to vanish. Animals like deer or elk typically run across open areas when startled, making them easy to track with thermal cameras. Yet some unidentified heat signatures appeared briefly and then disappeared into thick vegetation almost instantly. This suggested something extremely familiar with the terrain. Even more intriguing were the occasional discoveries of massive footprints detected by aerial photography. After storms or snowfall, large tracks sometimes appeared in remote valleys, visible only from above. By comparing aerial images taken days apart, researchers could sometimes trace the movement of these trackways across difficult terrain. Some wildlife specialists pointed out that the wilderness itself provides natural cover against technological observation. Dense tree canopies block many aerial sensors from seeing the ground clearly. Mountains create shadows that hide movement, and rivers can wash away tracks before they are detected. These factors make it possible for large animals to remain hidden even in an age of advanced surveillance. Another important limitation of technology is interpretation. Cameras and sensors collect data, but humans must decide what that data represents. If researchers are not specifically looking for an unknown primate, unusual observations might simply be categorized as unidentified wildlife and never investigated further. Nevertheless, technology has begun revealing how little we truly observe of the natural world. Even with satellites and drones, enormous portions of Earth's wilderness remain poorly studied. Scientists estimate that millions of species, particularly insects and small organisms, have yet to be formally documented. The idea that a large mammal could still exist undiscovered seems unlikely at first. Yet history offers surprising examples. Animals like the okapi, the giant panda, and the mountain gorilla were once unknown to Western science until relatively recently. In each case, local communities had known about the animals for generations before scientists finally confirmed their existence. As technology continues to improve, researchers may eventually capture clearer evidence of whatever is producing the strange signs reported in forests across North America. But even if cameras and satellites fail to provide definitive proof, another powerful source of evidence remains direct human encounters. And some of the most chilling encounters reported by witnesses suggest that if Bigfoot is real, it may possess far greater intelligence and awareness than anyone expected. While scientists analyze technology, DNA, and environmental clues, the most powerful evidence often came from the people who had actually seen something in the forest. Many of these witnesses did not seek attention. In fact, a large number waited years, sometimes decades, before speaking about their experiences. What made their testimonies compelling was not just what they saw, but how deeply the encounter affected them. One common pattern in witness reports is the sudden feeling of being watched. Hunters, hikers, and campers frequently describe entering an area of the forest where the atmosphere seems to change. Birds stop singing, the wind feels strangely quiet, and a heavy sense of awareness settles over the surroundings. Experienced outdoorsmen often say, "This sensation is different from encountering normal wildlife." In several cases, witnesses reported hearing something large moving through the forest just out of sight. Branches snapped under heavy weight, leaves crunched, and deep footsteps echoed behind them. Yet every time the person turned to look, the forest appeared empty. The movement would stop immediately, as if whatever was making the noise knew it had been noticed. Then there are the encounters where witnesses actually saw the creature. Many described the moment with striking clarity. A tall figure steps from behind a tree, standing far higher than a human and covered in thick dark fur. The arms hang unusually low, and the shoulders appear massive. Some witnesses report seeing intelligent eyes, watching them for several seconds before the figure slowly turns and disappears into the trees. One detail repeated in many accounts is the creature's speed. Despite its enormous size, Bigfoot is often described as moving with surprising agility. Witnesses have reported the creature crossing open ground in only a few strides before vanishing into dense vegetation. In mountainous regions, some sightings involve the figure climbing steep slopes with ease that would challenge even experienced hikers. Another intriguing pattern involves what researchers call boundary encounters. In these situations, the creature does not attack or approach aggressively. Instead, it appears to deliberately reveal itself briefly before retreating. Some investigators believe this behavior might serve as a warning, signaling humans to leave a particular area. There are also reports of objects being thrown from the forest. Campers occasionally describe small rocks or sticks landing near them without any visible source. The objects rarely strike people directly but land close enough to get their attention. This behavior has been interpreted by some researchers as a territorial display rather than an attempt to harm, perhaps. The most unsettling encounters occur at night. Campers sometimes report hearing heavy footsteps circling their tents or cabins after dark. Strange howls echo through the forest, followed by the sound of large movements just beyond the firelight. In many cases, witnesses describe feeling that something was deliberately staying out of sight while observing them. Despite the fear these experiences can cause, very few reports involve actual attacks. Most encounters end with the creature leaving the area once it realizes it has been seen. This pattern suggests a strong preference for avoiding direct conflict with humans. Such behavior would be consistent with an intelligent species that has learned to coexist with human expansion while remaining hidden. Psychologists who have interviewed witnesses often note something important about their reactions. Many people who report encounters show signs of genuine shock and confusion rather than excitement. They struggle to explain what they experienced, and often worry that others will dismiss them as mistaken or imaginative. Another interesting detail is that some witnesses claim the creature seemed curious rather than hostile. A few reports describe the figure watching from a distance for several minutes, tilting its head slightly as if studying the humans before quietly leaving. These moments have led some researchers to speculate that Bigfoot might possess advanced cognitive awareness. Of course, skeptics argue that eyewitness testimony alone cannot prove the existence of an unknown species. Human perception can be influenced by fear, darkness, and environmental conditions. Yet when hundreds of independent witnesses describe similar encounters across decades, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore completely. What these stories reveal most clearly is that the Bigfoot mystery is not just about physical evidence. It is also about human experiences that challenge our understanding of the natural world. People who spend their lives in the wilderness occasionally encounter something they cannot explain, and as more witnesses come forward and more scientists quietly review the growing body of evidence, a new possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps the real reason Bigfoot has remained hidden for so long is not because it is impossible to find, but because we have not been willing to look for it seriously enough. Asterisk. For most of the 20th century, the scientific community treated the idea of Bigfoot as a cultural curiosity rather than a legitimate research topic. Universities avoided funding studies related to the creature, and many zoologists dismissed the subject outright. The reasoning was simple. Without a physical specimen, science had no foundation for serious investigation. Yet in recent years, attitudes in some research circles have begun to shift. This change did not happen because someone suddenly captured definitive proof. Instead, it emerged gradually as scientists started examining the total weight of the evidence. When thousands of sightings, unusual footprints, unexplained vocalizations, environmental disturbances, and historical accounts are viewed together, the mystery becomes harder to ignore. Individually, each piece might be questioned. Collectively, they form a pattern that invites deeper investigation. One factor influencing this shift is the history of scientific discovery itself. Many animals once considered mythical were eventually proven real. The giant squid was once dismissed as a sailor's legend until deep-sea cameras captured it alive. The okapi was unknown to Western science until the early 20th century. Despite being well known to local communities in Africa, even the mountain gorilla remained largely hidden from researchers until the last century. Scientists today are also more aware that human knowledge of biodiversity remains incomplete. New species are discovered every year, including mammals, reptiles, and birds. While most new discoveries involve smaller animals, there have been surprising exceptions. In 1992, researchers identified a large mammal living in the forests of Vietnam that had never been documented before. Another reason for the growing interest is technological advancement. Modern tools allow researchers to analyze environments in ways that were impossible just a few decades ago. DNA sequencing, remote camera networks, and acoustic monitoring systems provide new ways to search for rare or elusive species. These technologies make it easier to gather data without relying solely on direct observation. Some universities have quietly begun allowing researchers to study unexplained wildlife evidence without labeling it as Bigfoot research. By focusing on environmental patterns, unidentified DNA samples, or unusual vocalizations, scientists can examine the data without risking their professional reputations. This approach allows the investigation to continue within the boundaries of accepted scientific methodology. Another influence comes from the growing field of citizen science. Outdoor enthusiasts, hikers, and wildlife observers now carry smartphones capable of recording high-quality video, audio, and GPS data. When unusual events occur in remote areas, these individuals can document evidence more effectively than ever before. The result is a growing database of observations from across the continent. Interestingly, some skeptics within the scientific community have also contributed to the discussion. By rigorously analyzing Bigfoot claims and attempting to debunk them, skeptics often uncover valuable information about wildlife behavior and environmental anomalies. In some cases, investigations meant to disprove sightings have revealed new details that raise additional questions. There is also increasing recognition that dismissing local knowledge can be a mistake. Indigenous traditions and rural communities often possess generations of experience with the landscapes they inhabit. Their observations about wildlife patterns, unusual sounds, or mysterious encounters can sometimes guide researchers toward discoveries that formal science had overlooked. Despite these changes, most scientists remain cautious. Extraordinary claims still require strong physical evidence. A verified body, skeleton, or clear genetic sequence would likely be necessary before the scientific community formally recognizes a new primate species in North America. Until such evidence appears, the Bigfoot question will remain open rather than settled. However, the difference today is that fewer researchers are willing to dismiss the subject entirely. Instead of ridicule, there is growing curiosity about whether the mystery deserves careful study. Science advances by questioning assumptions, and the possibility of an undiscovered species challenges long-held beliefs about what we think we know. About the natural world, some researchers have even suggested that the Bigfoot phenomenon may represent a rare convergence of multiple mysteries: unusual animal behavior, unexplored wilderness, and cultural storytelling that stretches back centuries. Untangling these elements could reveal insights not only about the creature itself, but also about how humans interact with the unknown. As the debate continues, one question remains at the center of the discussion. If Bigfoot truly exists, how long has it been living in the forests of North America, and what would happen if science finally confirmed its existence? The answer to that question could change our understanding of both nature and ourselves. For decades, the Bigfoot mystery has existed on the edge of science, somewhere between curiosity and controversy. But researchers sometimes ask a question that goes beyond footprints, sightings, or strange sounds in the forest. What would happen if undeniable proof finally appeared? What if scientists confirmed that a large, unknown primate had been living in the forests of North America all along? The impact on science would be immediate and enormous. Discovering a new, large mammal species in the modern world would be one of the most significant zoological events in centuries. Biologists would rush to study the creature's anatomy, genetics, and behavior. Entire research programs would likely emerge overnight, focused on understanding how such a species survived undetected for so long. Evolutionary biology would also be forced to reconsider several assumptions. If Bigfoot were confirmed as a surviving primate or hominin species, it would reshape our understanding of how human relatives evolved and migrated across the planet. Textbooks discussing ancient primates and human ancestry would need major revisions to include this unexpected branch of the evolutionary tree. Another major shift would occur in conservation science. If a population of Bigfoot existed, it would likely be extremely rare and vulnerable to human expansion. Governments and environmental organizations would face pressure to protect the creature's habitat. Large sections of forests might be designated as protected areas to ensure the species could survive without disturbance. The discovery would also transform how people view wilderness itself. Many assume that modern technology has mapped and explored nearly every corner of the earth. Confirming the existence of a hidden large primate would challenge that belief. It would remind humanity that vast regions of the planet still contain mysteries waiting to be discovered. Cultural reactions would be just as dramatic. For centuries, stories about Bigfoot have existed in folklore, documentaries, and popular culture. Suddenly, those stories would move from legend to scientific reality. Films, books, and historical records would be re-examined with new curiosity. People who once laughed at the idea might look back and wonder whether witnesses had been telling the truth all along. Indigenous communities might also gain renewed recognition for their traditional knowledge. Many tribes had long spoken about beings resembling Sasquatch living in the forests. If Bigfoot were proven real, these oral traditions could be viewed not as myths, but as historical observations passed down through generations. There would also be important ethical questions. If Bigfoot were intelligent, perhaps even possessing social structures, similar to great ape scientists would face complex decisions about how to study the species responsibly. Capturing or disturbing individuals might cause harm to a fragile population. Researchers would need to balance curiosity with respect for the creature's natural environment. Some experts believe the first confirmed evidence might not come from capturing a living individual at all. Instead, it could come from a clear DNA sequence, an undisputed fossil, or a high-quality recording that cannot be explained by known animals. In modern science, proof often arrives through data rather than dramatic encounters. Another possibility is that the discovery might occur unexpectedly through unrelated research. A biologist studying remote ecosystems could stumble upon evidence while investigating something entirely different. Many scientific breakthroughs have happened this way, through curiosity and careful observation rather than targeted searches. Regardless of how the evidence appears, the moment of confirmation would mark the end of one mystery and the beginning of another. Scientists would then need to understand how the species behaves, what it eats, how it communicates, and how many individuals actually exist in the wild. Perhaps the most profound realization would be that the world is still far less understood than we imagine. Even in an age of satellites and global communication, nature retains secrets hidden within forests, mountains, and oceans. And that realization leads to one final thought that many scientists now quietly admit. The real question may no longer be whether Bigfoot could exist. The real question might be whether humanity is finally ready to discover what has been living beside us in the wilderness all this time. For more than a century, the idea of Bigfoot has existed at the crossroads between myth and science. To some, it remains nothing more than a legend fueled by imagination and misidentified wildlife. But to others, hunters, park rangers, indigenous communities, and even a small number of scientists, the evidence tells a far more intriguing story. Across North America, the same patterns continue to appear. Massive footprints discovered in remote forests, strange vocalizations echoing through valleys at night, witnesses describing the same towering figure with long arms and powerful shoulders, ancient traditions that speak of a mysterious forest being long before modern cameras or documentaries existed. Individually, each piece of evidence might seem easy to dismiss. A footprint could be a hoax. A sound might belong to an unknown animal. A witness could simply be mistaken. But when all of these elements are viewed together, the mystery becomes much harder to ignore. History has shown that science does not always move quickly when confronting the unknown. Many discoveries once ridiculed eventually became accepted reality. Entire species have been revealed decades or even centuries after people first claimed to see them. In many cases, the truth was waiting patiently until technology and open-minded investigation finally caught up. The wilderness of North America is vast beyond imagination. Millions of acres of dense forests, mountains, and river valleys remain largely unexplored even today. These landscapes are capable of hiding remarkable secrets. Animals far smaller than Bigfoot have managed to avoid human detection for generations. If a large, intelligent primate were capable of moving silently through these environments, avoiding human settlements and traveling primarily at night, it is not impossible that it could remain unseen most of the time. Rare encounters would still occur, but only as brief glimpses, strange sounds, or footprints left behind in the mud. Perhaps that is why the mystery continues to fascinate people around the world. Bigfoot represents something deeper than just an unknown creature. It represents the idea that our planet may still hold surprises waiting to be discovered. In a world where technology makes us believe we know everything, the possibility of hidden life reminds us how much we still have to learn. Scientists today may not yet have definitive proof, but fewer researchers are willing to laugh at the question entirely. Instead, many now admit that the evidence deserves serious study rather than immediate dismissal, because if even a small part of the story turns out to be true, the implications would be extraordinary. It would mean that somewhere in the forests of North America, moving quietly between ancient trees and mist-covered mountains, there may still exist a species that has watched humanity grow and expand for centuries without ever truly revealing itself. And perhaps the most haunting thought of all is this: if Bigfoot is real, it may already know far more about us than we know about it. And somewhere tonight, deep in the wilderness, where the trees grow thick and the world becomes silent, something might still be watching from the shadows,